Speak Show, episode 23. This episode is called Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. For thousands of years, one of the ways that people have identified God is by calling him the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You could say that almost anywhere in the world, and people will know that you're referring to the God of the Jewish people and the God of Christianity. God has several names in the Bible, but that is one of the ways that people reference God, and the world over, he's known that way. Abraham is the father of faith. Isaac was the child that God promised him that would be the beginning of making Abraham into a great nation. And Esau was the firstborn of Isaac and Rebekah. And he had a twin brother, Jacob, but he was the firstborn. So I was listening to a message recently that pointed out that inspired this and this study that I've been doing. It pointed out the fact that it was supposed to be Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. Because Esau was the firstborn, and in the Jewish culture, the firstborn is significant. Genesis 25, starting in verse 23, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 people shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first one came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau, which means hairy. I'm big on meanings of names. Like when we named all of our kids, when we were considering names for all of our kids, my first question is, what does it mean? I'm very big on that. And his name means hairy. That's something. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a man dwelling in tents. I should look that up, what that even means, a man dwelling in tents. So what did he do? He wasn't a hunter anyway, and Isaac loved Esau because he ate his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So Isaac was proud of Esau because he was a hunter, he was a man's man. And the thing about him being hairy, it says that he's like a garment all over. And I thought, man, what is that? Like, you know, it almost sounds like it's not even possible. But I remember actually watching documentaries about these kids that were in the circus. And they had this condition called whatever, I can't remember. But they were covered head to toe with hair. Their face, they had hair on their face, like all over their face, all over their forehead. In between, like all over the nose, everything. It was like all hair everywhere. And it was this rare condition. So I guess that must have been what Esau was like. So Isaac loved Esau and Rebekah loved Jacob. Jacob's name, by the way, means heel holder or supplanter. Interesting. Now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me some of that red stew, for I am weary. Therefore his name is called Edom. I found that a little weird. Therefore his name is called Edom. I looked it up and in the concordance, and it says actually in this verse that is why he's also called Edom. And Edom means red. So he's called Esau because that means hairy. And his nickname or his other name is Red because of this red stew. Quite a legacy. But Jacob said, sell me your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, look, I'm about to die. I think that's a little bit dramatic. I'm about to die, so what is this birthright to me? Then Jacob said, swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob, and Jacob gave him bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank and arose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Okay, so the birthright, the word is, I can't probably pronounce it, but Bakora. Bekorah. This has to do with both position and inheritance. By birthright, the firstborn son inherited the leadership position in the family and the judicial authority of his father. Deuteronomy 21:17 states that he was also entitled to a double portion of the paternal inheritance. So a double portion of the value of the inheritance, but also he's the new boss. I watched a documentary or a talk that a Jewish rabbi did explaining this. And he said that Esau was supposed to take over. He's supposed to take over, like, basically the family business. And he's supposed to be the next in line to take over the family business and continue on after Isaac's death. So Abraham was no slouch. I mean, he had 300 trained men. He had flocks and herds. He was rich. He was very rich. The Bible said God made Abraham very rich. Now, Isaac took that over from Abraham when his time came, and he would have built on that. So the family grew, the hired hands and the flocks and everything would have grown, and this was this huge operation. And that's why it says he despised his birthright, because the word that used there for despise, it means to toss aside as worthless. He had no value for it. Like, he basically didn't want the job, according to this rabbi. He wanted a single portion of the inheritance, and he wanted to go live his life. Because everybody else in the family that got their single portion of the inheritance, I mean, they would have their duties and so on, but I mean, they basically go live their life. Well, the firstborn would get a double portion of the inheritance, but he would have the responsibility of now running this whole operation. So he wanted his single portion, and he wanted to be able to live his life. What he didn't count on was that giving up his birthright was going to mean a lot more than he thought. See, anything we don't value or have an arrogant attitude about, we're going to lose. My point here is that selfishness and pride and fear are all expensive. Like, if you think about Moses, he couldn't enter the promised land because of his anger. Which, I mean, after everything that Moses did and went through, to not be able to enter the promised land was a costly mistake. The children of Israel were stuck in the wilderness until an entire generation died off because they refused to believe God out of fear. Even Caleb and Joshua, who were innocent in that whole thing, and they were like, let's go, we can possess the land, they had to wait all of that time until that generation died off to go and possess their inheritance, even though it wasn't their fault. So the things that we do, I mean, affect other people. Look at David, 2 Samuel 11, starting in chapter 11. It happened in the spring of that year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. So he should have been out with the army, and he stayed back because he's sitting this one out. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about the woman, and someone said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. This was an act of I want. It was selfishness. He saw her, he inquired about her, he took her. Then he had her husband killed to cover it up, because she was pregnant, and he was an honorable man who, when the king called him in to eat and drink with him and so on, he refused to go home to his wife because his brothers were still out on the battlefield, and he didn't think it was right. So the cost of all of this was the life of the child, a completely innocent child. When people read this story, I think we tend to focus on David and Bathsheba and, they lost their child and they lost their son because of the sin that they'd committed. But what about the child? People don't really think about the child very much in this. What about the child? The child was completely innocent, and this was a life of untold potential. What could this child have been? He would have been a child of the king, even though he was conceived through adultery. He would have been the child of the king. And he didn't even get a chance to live, hardly. And then he got sick and died because of their sin. The only reason David didn't die is because when he was confronted with his sin, he repented right away. But how about having to live with that the rest of your life? So this whole thing about like Abraham, Isaac, and Esau, this really like hit home with me about how important and how much of an impact just our choices have. The things that you like, the things that you screw up in life are costly. The things that you get right in life have this reward and this harvest that comes in. And we don't even know how many of those rewards we might have missed out on by bad choices or by just not walking with God in that moment and in that time where God had a plan for us to be blessed, and we just wouldn't go with him, and we missed it. You know, it really hits me that living for God and listening to the Holy Spirit is just that much more important. When you look at what it's cost other people. Esau had no idea what that attitude and that arrogance would cost him. He had no clue. So here's a couple examples I found, like right in these two passages. They're similar stories, but they have right in these two passages they show both examples very well of how a person's choices can have a far-reaching positive impact on their life and the life of their people around them and the people in their life, or a far-reaching negative impact. John 12, starting in verse 3. These are two stories about women with oil, like anointing oil. So John 12, starting in verse 3. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always." Well, if you look at how that whole deal turned out, Judas was the guy that betrayed the Lord for money and hung himself because he had made a habit a life out of being consumed by greed and stealing from Jesus' ministry. Matthew 26, verse 6. And when Jesus was in Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. That must have been interesting. To be sitting at the table with a bunch of guys having a conversation, and she just walks up and pours oil all over his head. I mean, a lot of people would be upset about that for the reason of, I got oil all over my head now. What are you doing? But Jesus knew what she was doing. But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor." But when Jesus was aware of it, so I don't know if these guys thought this, were thinking this amongst themselves, or were they kind of grumbling among themselves or what? Because it says, when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my head, she did it for my burial." And here's the key point to this. "Assuredly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." That's very significant. That what she's done, the good thing that she's done, Jesus he ensured that it would be told everywhere all over the world, wherever the gospel is preached. And what's also told all over the world, wherever this gospel is preached, is that his disciples were indignant about it. Because the story is told all over the world. It's not just, there was this lady back when Jesus was walking on the earth that poured oil on his head. It's the whole story. So, as a memorial to her, what the good thing that she's done for him is told all over the world, but also as like a black eye for the disciples, their indignant attitude about it is told all over the world. Now, I don't know. These two stories are both in the Gospels. They're very similar. I don't know if they're. I haven't studied this aspect of it. I don't know if they're the same woman or if they're two separate women. But I think they're two separate women. But if they are two separate women, they're the only two people in world history to have anointed the body of Jesus for his burial before he died. That's significant. And if it's the same person, the only one to have anointed his body for his burial before he died. I need to study that now and find the answer to that question. But that scripture in verse 13, "Assuredly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." That's what I thought of when I thought about Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. What Esau did is forever being told as a memorial to his bad decision, in a bad sense. It's like what the Bible calls like a byword, like it's a notorious example. Notorious. What this woman did is still being told as a memorial to her honoring the Lord. It's a memorial to her for honoring the Lord. I bet Esau would have valued his birthright a little bit more if he'd known what the actual result would be of that choice. But he probably never did know that. I mean, he probably would have had some scrutiny or whatever in the rest of his time on earth and his life. People maybe made fun of him or talked about it or whatever. Because obviously people knew he was the firstborn. Everybody in his generation or everybody that he knew he was the firstborn. So they knew that he should have been the one in charge after Isaac died, and he wasn't. But he wouldn't have known. He wouldn't know that thousands and thousands of years later, we'd still be talking about him and his red stew. And that applies to us. That applies to you in your life. Your life will affect generations of your family after you're gone. What you put in your kids, what you put in the people around you. You can see that in any family that has like the first person to get saved in their family, in their whole family like lineage. It changes that family forever. If that person lives the rest of their life for God, the trajectory of their whole family's changed. And future generations won't grow up without God in their life. You see the same thing in families where alcoholism is a problem. It often goes down from one generation to another because of influence and because of access when you're a kid, and the hurts and everything that goes along with it. Like kids will often grow up and start drinking themselves and repeat the same problem. Super common. Violence is the same. Kids that grow up in a violent home often repeat it. Sex offenders are the same. Often were abused when they were a kid. Our choices matter far more than we realize. That's why Christians live according to the Bible. Jesus said, if anyone wants to follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Because I don't think, apart from the Bible, apart from ordering your life by the Bible, I don't think you can really live a good life. Jesus also said in Matthew 10:38 and 39, in the New Living Translation, if you refuse to take up your cross and follow me, you're not worthy of me. You're not worthy of being mine. If you cling to your life, you'll lose it. If you give up your life for me, you'll find it. That might seem like a obscure poem, but what he's saying is that we don't even know what life is on our own. Apart from the Bible, you don't even know what real life is. That's why people give up their whole lives to have things or to have a certain a status or a certain whatever. People give up their lives to be famous, and then realize it's all empty and pretty much worthless after the initial fun wears off. People throw away their whole lives for a thrill. Because we don't know, without God, we don't know what life really is. Life does not exist in the abundance of your possessions. Life is not just all about fun. Life is not just all about desire. Real life is found in giving up your life in exchange for living the life Jesus gives. The kind of life that will be found profitable when you present it to him one day. Everything in this life that doesn't have eternal value will be burned up one day. Well, it'll be worthless one day. It only lasts for this short season while you're on earth, and then it's worthless. This old saying of you can't take it with you when you go, right? People are not going to talk about, when you die and people come to your funeral, they're not going to talk about how much money you made, and they're not going to talk about how many vacations you took. They're going to talk about the things that you did in your life that impacted other people. Now, you can use money to do that, for sure. You can use money to do things that impact other people. But like I said in the last episode, only what's done for Christ will last. That poem is so powerful because it's true. Only what's done for Christ will last because only what's done for Christ is eternal. You can do good things for people in this life that will help them in this life. feeding somebody that's hungry is a good thing that should be done. Every Christian should be doing that. If you see an opportunity, if you see somebody that's needs help, feeding somebody that's hungry is a good thing. But it only impacts eternity if that person understands the reason that you're doing it is because you want to share God's love with them. Or because God's love compels you to show them love. That's the only part of that that's eternal, or could be eternal. If you can feed somebody that's destitute on the street and homeless, and tell them about Jesus, or tell them that God told, even telling you, listen, the Lord told me, God told me to get you something to eat, because he wants you to know that you're not alone, or that he loves you, or, in some way sharing the gospel, or at least the existence of God with that person, that has eternal value. Feeding the person is right and good, but the person will be hungry again in a matter of hours. But if your act of love, which is provoked by compassion in your heart that comes from God, if your act of love makes them see that there is a God and that there is an eternity, and it makes them look toward God, it's eternally valuable. It's giving them a chance. It's giving them a chance to come take a step toward God. That has eternal value. So when we get to the end of our life and we present our life to the Lord and say, here's what I've done with what you've given me. Everything that's not of eternal value will be worthless. So with my life, with the rest of my life, I know that a lot of my life, I didn't do anything of eternal value up until this point, but I'm going to say almost at the midway point of my life. I'm going to say almost. Like in the next 10 years, maybe. I think I could go until 110. So I'm going to say in the next 10 years, I'll be at midlife. With the next half of my life, I want to lay up for myself treasures in heaven. I want my life to have eternal value. I want my life to make an impact on other people that of eternal value. And temporal value just in this life too. I want to do good things in my life. I want my life to matter to other people, but most of all, I want my life to matter to God. Like I want the things that I've done in this life to be for him. Most of all. Because real life is found in giving up your life in exchange for living the life Jesus gives. The kind of life that will be found profitable when I present it to him. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. If you like the show, please share and follow so you get future episodes as soon as they come out. Until next time, walk humbly before your God and never let the world speak.